From A&E, this is Biography.
Hello, I'm Harry Smith. Welcome again to A&E's Biography of the Millennium. We're here in the Royal Observatory in Greenwich, England, home of the official Millennium Countdown clock, where we'll continue our countdown of the 100 most influential people of the last 1,000 years. Now, in the past 10 centuries, countless billions of people have walked the earth, but a few of them changed everything. They dreamed bigger, fought harder, thought smarter. They were inventors and explorers, philosophers, artists, and tyrants. How can you possibly choose 100 people out of billions? We turn to a distinguished panel of historians, scholars, and experts to give us their picks. Then we listen to your suggestions at our biography website and put it all together. Walt Disney, a man who brought a lot of happiness to a lot of hearts.
I can't remember 99 and 44 100% of all the movies I saw when I was a little boy. I can't remember any of them. But boy, do I remember Snow White. I still like to see Snow White. I still love to see the Seven Dwarfs. I think they're great.
The young Disney dreamed of being a newspaper cartoonist, and in 1923, he and his brother opened a small animation studio. 5 years later, they introduced the world to Mickey Mouse, a little guy short on fingers, but long on heart.
Walt, we want more fingers. You can't do anything with 4 fingers, Walt.
I tell Walt, I say, look at your characters. They are very accessible, very with the big eyes.
From that tiny mouse, a worldwide media empire was born, and a lovable cast of characters conquered the globe.
He brought families together. He brought countries together. He basically broke through all the social and moral and political language barriers, and Walt Disney is as famous as Coca-Cola.
He was the son of a blacksmith, but Michael Faraday laid the foundation for the age of electricity. It all began with this primitive motor.
I think with some magnets and some, a wheel and a couple of wires, and the thing would simply turn as long as you applied current to it.
Now electricity does the chores for the farmer's wife.
Faraday also figured out how to send electric power over distance via the generator and the transformer. Without him, we'd have no electric appliances, no mixers or toasters. And here's a frightening thought: no television.
We face the future with confidence and with courage. We are American.
When you look at American political leaders of the century, one person stands out so far above the others that it's not even close, and that's Franklin Roosevelt.
At age 39, he was struck down by polio. Yet his determination and compassion would guide our nation through 2 of its greatest crises. The only man ever elected president 4 times, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, number 60 on our list. In 1933, he set in motion the New Deal, massive programs to restore jobs and pull the country out of the Great Depression. And then his nation faced an even greater challenge, World War II.
We are going to win this war, and we are going to win the peace that follows.
Roosevelt led us through both the greatest war in history and the domestic crisis, and also left behind a legacy of ideas embodied in his greatest speeches, which live on to this day.
Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
He's been called the most influential thinker of modern times. German philosopher Immanuel Kant. Kant believed that we all possess a sense of right and wrong.
a moral framework that should guide our lives. He called it the categorical imperative. His theories influenced Karl Marx. Yet in practice, communist regimes were repressive, and many believed the very antithesis of Kant's philosophy. A peasant girl who heard divine voices. Joan of Arc, number 58, patron saint of France. She led her country into combat against the English when she was only a teenager. But while she won the battle, she lost her life when she was accused of heresy and burned at the stake. Later, Joan of Arc would be canonized. Today, she's still an international symbol of faith and freedom. Another teenager who got the world all shook up is Elvis Presley, number 57, the king of rock and roll. From the age of 13, Elvis began to soak up the music that would make him a star: gospel, country, rhythm and blues.
He was the guy who really brought black music into the white vocabulary. He was the first white boy who really could sing like a black man and was popular.
Elvis was discovered while recording birthday songs for his mother. Soon he became a nationwide sensation with movies, TV shows, and sold-out concerts, all featuring the good old boy with the smoldering eyes and the live wire hips.
Elvis had this kind of magic combination of looks and voice. I mean, you cannot discount what a good-looking young man he was.
With his smile and his snarl, Elvis brought rock and roll into the mainstream and changed pop culture itself.
I think I have on something tonight that's not quite correct for evening wear.
Not quite formal? What's that, Elvis?
Blue suede shoes.
Oh, yeah!
A generation of teenage rebels followed his lead, making him not just a musician, but an idol. Some even consider him immortal. No wonder people still see him all over the world.
History isn't made by a few people, it's made by a lot of people. But without thousands, millions of people acting with the courage of Stanton, we would still today be objects, not people.
Elizabeth Cady Stanton was the First Lady of American Feminism, number 56 on our list. She made her mark organizing the first women's rights convention at Seneca Falls, New York in 1848, for which she wrote a rousing manifesto.
That document came to the conclusion that women should not be excluded from those glorious words of the Declaration and the Constitution, and believed that they had those inalienable rights that men had.
Stanton soon joined forces with Susan B. Anthony. Together, they crusaded for women's causes. Stanton died in 1902, years before women were granted the right to vote, but with the knowledge that she had changed the relationship between men and women forever. He set sail in 1519 looking for trade routes. What he found was a whole new world. This meant Portugal's Ferdinand Magellan. He led his fleet down the east coast of South America and discovered a passageway to the Pacific Ocean, the strait that still bears his name. Magellan died before his fleet struggled back to Spain, but his expedition achieved something unprecedented: the first journey around the Earth.
What it did is it really, I think, gave us a global context of our planet.
And Magellan's trip did one more very important thing. It proved that the world is round.
I think John F. Kennedy should be on this list because he averted nuclear war by deciding that we would not bomb Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Ferdinand Magellan's dreams may have been fueled by reading the exploits of this man, the Venetian merchant Marco Polo, perhaps the most famous travel writer in history. Polo journeyed to Mongol China in 1271 and stayed nearly 20 years. His book, The travels of Marco Polo was filled with fantastic stories and the first maps of Asia ever seen in the West. Polo's adventures ignited European interest in the Orient and inspired generations of explorers to come. Number 53 on our list is considered the greatest woman scientist in history, Madame Marie Curie. Together, she and her husband, Pierre, would lay the groundwork for the study of radiation.
She was a very special lady. She was the first to isolate a radioactive element, and then she discovered radium. And that was a profound contribution.
The discovery of these new elements led to the 1903 Nobel Prize for Physics for Pierre and Marie, the first time the award had ever been won by a woman. Over the past century, the use of X-rays and nuclear medicine has saved hundreds of thousands of lives. Tragically, Curie's discovery would lead to her death. She died of leukemia brought on by overexposure to radiation. Today, her notebooks remain under lock and key, still lethally radioactive.
What kind of a people do they think we are? Is it possible they do not realize that we shall never cease to persevere against them until they have been taught a lesson which they and the world will never forget?
The difference between great and ordinary statesmen is not intelligence, but vision and courage.
The invincible Sir Winston Churchill. In a life that spanned 9 decades, Sir Winston saw it all. Everything from the cavalry charge to thermonuclear weapons. And when World War II erupted, the British turned to Churchill for leadership.
Churchill's combination of sheer courage, relentless energy, and the fact that he was a military man who knew an immense amount about the art of war enabled Britain to survive at a point when I think any other leader would have given in.
Miraculously, Britain held under the bulldog leadership of Winston Churchill.
It is difficult to imagine any of the available leaders who could have rallied Britain in 1940 the way Churchill did.
Lift up your heart. All will come right out of the depths of sorrow and of sacrifice. Will be born again the glory of mankind.
He was a 19th century romantic at a time when that kind of heroic approach worked well in the world. I don't know if it would work today. This is not a time of great heroes, but Churchill believed in heroes, and he consciously set out in that mold, and it was an extraordinary achievement.
It has been called the deadliest disease on Earth. Over the past millennium, hundreds of millions of people have died of smallpox. There has never been a cure, but thanks to this man, Edward Jenner, smallpox can be prevented.
Jenner made the very advantageous discovery that milkmaids who would get cowpox from the cows they were milking, when a smallpox epidemic hit the town, seemed to be okay.
He observed that the cowpox protected the maids from smallpox epidemics. In 1796, Jenner inoculated a young boy with cowpox, and it worked. He called his new procedure vaccination, from the Latin word vacca, for cow. Within a few years, it began saving thousands of lives. The last reported natural case of smallpox was in 1977 in Somalia. For the first time in history, a killer disease had been wiped off the earth.
You see, Margaret Sanger, without her, I couldn't be Dr. Ruth Westheimer. She was a wonderful, courageous woman who really influenced work on that contraceptive pill, which certainly has changed the entire world.
Margaret Sanger, number 50 on our list, worked as a nurse in the slums of New York City. She was appalled by what she saw, the misery of unwanted pregnancies, the lack of sex education for men and women.
Margaret Sanger understood that we couldn't really have freedom from the skin out until we had freedom from the skin in. That is, until women could control our own reproductive lives.
Birth control teaches parents to bring into the world children by choice rather than by chance.
As the world's population continues to grow, Sanger's work goes on through her Planned Parenthood Foundation.
Mikhail Gorbachev was learning the hard lesson of democracy today, that giving people freedom means they are free to turn against you.
He's the founding father of Glasnost and the last leader of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev.
What I find fascinating about Gorbachev is that he was a good human being who brought about results that he didn't really want. Gorbachev wanted to reform the communist system. And he wanted to modernize the communist system. He didn't want to overthrow the communist system.
When Gorbachev took power in 1985, he set out to preserve communism by reshaping the crippled Soviet economy. But then everything changed.
And once he opened up the prison doors of the communist society and said, let's have glasnost, you couldn't give people 50% freedom. His importance is undeniable, but the impact of what he did was not what he intended.
History will note that he did a lot intentionally. His role is as a catalyst for the most important event of century's end, and that was the dismantling, almost bloodlessly, of what Ronald Reagan called the evil empire.
She was the original feminist, and her work influenced millions who followed. Number 48 on our list, Mary Wollstonecraft. In 18th century England, women were supposed to know their place. But Wollstonecraft spoke out for liberation in her book, A Vindication of the Rights of Woman. She would leave behind the seeds of progressive legislation and a daughter who was a writer too, Mary Shelley, famed author of Frankenstein. He was an unknown academic with a revolutionary idea. Charles Babbage, the father of the computer. He sketched out the design in the 1830s, but was never able to build it.
His problem was the materials that were available to him were so crude. He could not create the wheels and the sprockets with sufficient precision that the engine would actually work well.
100 years later, a Harvard graduate student stumbled on his designs and gave birth to the computer revolution, which is only just beginning.
Machiavelli is the first person to say, what is power? How does it work? How do you get it? How do you lose it?
Niccolò Machiavelli, number 46. This author and diplomat wrote the book that's still the definitive study of politics nearly 500 years later. Machiavelli told aspiring rulers that to stay on the throne, they must be prepared to use any means necessary.
That notion of power as a kind of independent end in itself, whether a good or a bad thing, that is Machiavelli's contribution to the modern world. The fact that Machiavelli talks about how to be amoral in pursuing power means that whenever we don't like someone, we call them Machiavelli.
Few men understood raw power, the power of the sword and the longbow, like William the Conqueror, number 45 of the Millennium 100. At the Battle of Hastings in 1066, he became the only foreigner ever to conquer England. Soon this illegitimate son of a French duke stamped his will upon the land. His subjects came to know him as William the Bastard.
He was a bastard. He was a bastard. Norman bastard came here, landed, he would put his troops out, they advanced and then they retreated, and we came, we broke ranks, there it was, you know, and then they just cut us to pieces. William, you bastard! You French bastard! Next thing you know, we're all learning different words. All right, then.
William's Norman conquest did bring a cascade of French and Latin words into the English language. It also brought new concepts like common law and a centralized government. And after William's victory, England would go on to build the mightiest empire since ancient Rome.
Hello? Would you please get off this line?
Kant speaking. Hello, Daily Planet?
The sound of the phone, the time will be exactly 12:05, please. Number, please. Information. Oh, darling.
Please hold for number 44 on our list, the illustrious Alexander Graham Bell.
He was starting out trying to figure out how to send more than one telegraph signal through the same wire. When he realized that he could send sound or voice through this thing, he got very excited because I think he believed he could help his deaf wife.
Bell invented the telephone in 1876. At first, it was regarded as little more than a novelty. But in just 4 years, there were nearly 250,000 worldwide. And that was just the beginning.
Most business today is done over the telephone, and if you add to the telephone internet and radio and television that's now being digitized and sent over phone lines, Alexander Graham Bell is controlling 99% of all of our communications in this day and age.
It was called the Little Red Book, Quotations of Chairman Mao Zedong, leader of the Chinese Communist Revolution.
He seized control of the largest country on earth, starting from a base of almost nothing. It took him over 20 years. He then transformed his country dramatically. He killed millions of people. He is right up there with Hitler and Stalin as one of the greatest murderers of the century.
Mao ruled China for 27 years, and though he lifted 1/5 of the world's people up from feudal deprivation, the nation he created remains one of the most repressive regimes of modern times. With the fall of the Soviet Union, China is now the world's reigning communist society. He invented the science of genetics, an Austrian monk named Gregor Mendel, number 42 of the Millennium 100. Mendel patiently cultivated thousands of pea plants, studying how characteristics like height, shape, and color were passed from one generation to the next.
This was an absolutely fascinating discovery of heredity, the beginning of the understanding of genetics.
The first thing that he brought to light was the fact that there are what he called dominant traits and recessive traits.
Today, we grow closer to understanding how every gene works, how each may be altered or copied to fight disease or even to duplicate life itself. Humble brother Mendel's discovery that each living thing inherits traits from the generations that preceded it was the first step.
People are trying to do more and more with their personal computers. They're reaching out and viewing it as a critical communications tool.
There are less than a dozen living members on our list, and this man is the youngest of them all. Bill Gates, college dropout, chairman and CEO of Microsoft, and the man who transformed the computer industry. His software products are installed in more than 90% of all personal computers worldwide.
Think about electricity or water or the phone system just being there. You take all of that for granted. Computers will be the same way.
Less than 20 years ago, Bill Gates' company was hired to design the operating system for IBM's first personal computers. Gates' program, MS-DOS, soon became the standard for the entire PC industry.
Bill found a place in history to fill, and then because of his character, managed to fill it extremely well.
And he's also damned lucky that IBM didn't understand the value of what it was he was doing.
From Word to Windows, Gates' software has helped spark the most radical revolution in communications and information since the printing press.
I don't think that any living person should have been included in your list. I think that should have been the first criteria.
They all laughed, Wilbur and his brother, when they said that man could fly.
Of course they laughed. Flying was the stuff of dreams, lovely to contemplate, impossible to achieve. But Wilbur and Orville Wright, number 40 on our list, ignored the laughter. For more than a decade, these two bicycle mechanics from Dayton, Ohio, worked to build a flying machine. They conducted thousands of experiments with gliders, designing just the right wing and propeller. There were lots of failures, but on December 17, 1903, at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, Orville Wright flew their propeller-driven craft 120 feet. It was the first of 4 flights that day and the beginning of a brand new era.
They challenged themselves and pushed themselves to the limit. For all their perseverance, we've now got people being able to fly around the world in less than 30 hours.
The Wrights' invention not only revolutionized transportation, it answered an age-old yearning.
Man has always regretted being earthbound and has wanted to fly and wanted to soar and wanted to be weightless and wanted to explore. And the Wright brothers certainly made probably the greatest contribution to the entire 20th century by putting us there.
Who's got the last laugh now?
From flights of reality to flights of fancy, it's been said that only 2 writers shaped the modern world with their words, Shakespeare and this man, Dante Alighieri. Dante's Divine Comedy tells the story of a hero's journey through heaven, hell, and purgatory. More than a gripping tale, the Divine Comedy is a veritable encyclopedia of the Middle Ages. Most important, it was written in Italian, not ancient Latin, making it accessible to the masses. To this day, Dante's masterpiece entertains readers everywhere with its wit, poetry, and beauty. Sir Francis Bacon, number 38, was a philosopher, statesman, and pioneer of modern science, the father of the scientific method.
The vision that Bacon comes up with, that we are, in fact, capable of understanding the world, of knowing it better, and that science is the way of doing it, is a very important vision.
His scientific method is at the core of all modern research. To understand the way things work, Bacon said, you have to go out and observe the world, gather data, experiment. Ironically, science also proved his undoing. Testing to see if cold could preserve food, Bacon stuffed a raw chicken with snow. The experiment was a success, but Bacon himself caught a chill and died. He was the wit and conscience of 18th century France, one of the greatest thinkers of the Enlightenment, Voltaire.
Voltaire is a huge mover, a sort of philosophical showman, one of the earliest important, genuine international intellectual celebrities.
Voltaire was twice imprisoned in the Bastille, but fought against tyranny and intolerance his whole life. His weapon, words, the biting satire of his books. In plays and pamphlets and novels like Candide, Voltaire spoke out against the oppression of organized religion and the monarchy. At a time when Europe was ruled with an iron fist, his bold ideas swept across the continent, laying the foundation for revolution and the freedoms we cherish today. It's a good thing that number 36, Alexander Fleming, was a messy guy. Otherwise, he probably wouldn't be on our Millennium list. Fleming's story begins in his London laboratory. One day in 1928, he noticed a strange fungus growing in a petri dish that seemed to kill the bacteria around it. He ran some tests, wrote up his notes, and put the mold aside.
Most of us would have looked and said, oh, and thrown it away. That's what would happen.
The substance was penicillin, and it would revolutionize medicine. Penicillin laid waste the germs that cause such deadly diseases as diphtheria, pneumonia, and syphilis.
I am old enough to have practiced medicine in the days before penicillin, and I can tell you it was like night and day. People died of things that we would never think a patient would die of.
The discovery of penicillin came at a crucial moment. With the outbreak of World War II, it was hailed as the wonder drug. By the time D-Day arrived, there was enough penicillin to treat every wounded Allied soldier. Fleming received the Nobel Prize, a knighthood, and the knowledge that his work had saved millions of lives. He led a world-shaking revolution and became the first ruler of the Soviet Union. Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, Lenin, number 35 on our list. He took the theories of Marx and Engels and twisted them for his own use while secretly organizing opposition to the Tsar. As famine and poverty devastated Russia, Lenin organized the Bolshevik Party, and in November 1917, he led them to the barricades, and the revolution began.
It wasn't a true people uprising. The Bolsheviks were never the majority in Russia. It was a coup. It was a party-led coup by a brilliant political opportunist.
It was a surprisingly bloodless takeover, but the aftermath was not. Lenin was ruthless. Civil war, starvation, and the secret police killed millions.
What Lenin was about in the end was brutality and power. The first concentration camps were the creation of Lenins. The establishment of a war on intellectuals and free thought and religion was an invention not of Stalin's, but of Lenin's.
Lenin's dream was to spread the communist revolution around the world. He would succeed only in part, but the lives that were lost, the money that was wasted in 7 decades of East-West strife make Lenin's rise to power one of the pivotal events of the millennium. Number 34 on our list was a bitter, insecure man with magnificent ideas. This man, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He believed people were born innately good, but soon corrupted. Yet it didn't have to be that way.
Rousseau really believed that we could actually create a kind of political society where we all say what we mean. Sincerity, integrity, but above all sincerity seemed to be a kind of crucial thing for Rousseau.
Rousseau conceived the idea of a social contract where people could gather together to form a communal government. In other words, majority rules, the simple yet eloquent principle that was the foundation for the French Revolution and the cornerstone of democracy ever since.
I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the voice of America's civil rights movement. He preached a doctrine of nonviolent protest in the face of segregationist brutality and revealed to the world the injustice of racial discrimination. His words inspired both blacks and whites to join the struggle for a more just society.
He's someone who encouraged them to dream and to reach out. He's someone who got across to them that you don't have to feel inferior. You don't have to accept discrimination.
The grace of Dr. King's vision was best expressed on an August day in 1963, the March on Washington.
When all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
King would die a martyr to his cause in 1968, gunned down by an assassin.
Martin Luther King's ideals live on in America. The ideal that we are bound together, and if we work together, we can have the hope. The glory is in the striving. And so I think that that's the legacy that lives on, is the legacy of hope.
I think, therefore I am. Number 32, René Descartes, father of modern philosophy. But it's not just philosophy that earned him a place on our list.
I think Descartes makes the top 100 easily. His contributions to mathematics are incalculable.
X squared plus y squared equals z squared. That's Descartes. He was the first to describe a curve in space as a formula. It's called analytical geometry, and it's essential to every branch of science. He then used the scientific method to build a framework for philosophy.
And what he says is that in the end, all I know is that I'm thinking. Whatever else may be true or not true, I, Descartes, am thinking. Since I'm thinking, therefore I exist, and from that very, very tiny admission, Descartes builds an entire philosophy.
Descartes taught us to doubt the word of authority, to believe only what we can perceive for ourselves. He showed us that the entire universe is rational, governed by physical laws, and that is why every scientist, every thinker today can be called a descendant of Descartes. The scientists who unlocked the secret of life and unraveled the structure of DNA are James Watson and Francis Crick. They identified the DNA molecule that contains all the genetic information in animal and human cells. Their findings won them the Nobel Prize in 1962. Scientists are now deciphering the entire human genetic structure, figuring out which genes create eye and hair color, personality traits, susceptibility to disease. Watson and Crick's discovery has led to genetic engineering, from miracle cures to clones like Dolly the sheep. They are probably the most famous opening notes in music. As insistent as a fist pounding on a door, the first two bars of the Fifth Symphony. The work of number 30, the immortal Ludwig van Beethoven. As a child, Beethoven was abused and driven by his father to be the next Mozart. But he would be an imitation of no one. The young man was tempestuous, willful, electric. His music laid bare the raw tones of emotion, the fury and the passion of the human spirit.
For me, power, musical power, is Beethoven.
For the last 10 years of his life, Beethoven was totally deaf. The man who wrote the exhilarating Ode to Joy could not hear a note of his masterpiece, nor the applause that greeted it.
I can't imagine how he heard it inside his head. I just can't imagine being able to create this kind of beauty and warmth and really only hearing it inside that head.
He used to cut the legs of his piano and put it on the floor so that he could, when he played, he could listen to the vibrations. For me, that is tragedy at its worst or at its best.
These rugged little tin Lizzies were made to order for an America itching to get up and go.
Henry Ford put America on wheels. He didn't just popularize the automobile, he created the assembly line and put America's industrial revolution into overdrive. Between 1908 and 1927, Ford's Michigan factories turned out 15 million Model Ts, a simple car famous for being available in any color as long as it was black.
He had a whole bunch of guys and pieces of the car moving along the production line. You could make cars very, very quickly that way.
Very quickly, and cheaper by the dozen. Ford's booming sales built one of the greatest industrial empires in the world. He controlled everything needed to build his cars, from the rubber plantations for tires to the mills that made the steel bodies. And in just 20 years, the automobile helped transform a land of rural isolation into a nation on the move.
I love to watch the TV game shows today. What is the big prize? Always. It's a car, okay? It's the American dream. It is the fulfillment of a piece of the American dream made possible by Henry Ford.
They were the first family of music, the Bachs. Some 60 musicians, 7 generations of performers and writers, but one stood above them all, a largely self-taught composer, Johann Sebastian Bach, number 28. In his time, Bach was known as a virtuoso organist, the best to ever play the instrument, but it would take 2 centuries before his compositions would be acknowledged.
You know, when I listen to Bach, it's a revelation.
Bach created elaborate lines of melody that combine in extraordinary arrangements of harmony. His musical output was astonishing, more than 800 compositions.
We use the word genius very loosely these days, but certainly I don't think it's a waste on Bach. You know, when everything fits and everything dovetails, the effect is total inspiration. That's genius. And that's what he had.
Some men are born great, some have greatness thrust upon them, and some just seize it with both hands. Like this man, Napoleon Bonaparte, number 27, perhaps the finest military commander of all time. Napoleon grabbed control of France in a 1799 coup d'etat. From there, he conquered virtually all of continental Europe and became one of the most flamboyant rulers of all time.
It's all show and glitter and spangly style over real substance, in my view. So you have in Napoleon the most unbelievably gifted figure, you know, who expends all that talent on self-promotion. What a waste.
Napoleon is one of those remarkable forces, much like Hitler, much like Genghis Khan, who are so effective, so brilliant, so powerful, that you organize the world around them, but they may not leave much of a lasting mark.
Like many conquerors, Napoleon went one step too far. Trying to capture Moscow, his army faced a brutally cold winter and was decimated. In Belgium in 1815, the Battle of Waterloo marked his final defeat. Despite a legacy of legal reforms, Napoleon spent the rest of his life in exile. "Power is my mistress," he said. She was good to him for a lifetime, but deserted him in the end.
For me, the key to Mozart is to enjoy his robust lust for living and at the same time to play him as simply as possible.
If ever a genius exploded on the scene like the short, bright burst of a skyrocket, it was number 26 on our Millennium list, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. He was able to play keyboard instruments from the age of 3. At 6, he went on tour with his father and sister, performing for the crowned heads of Europe. By then, he was already composing, and even more amazingly, he was doing it all in his head.
For me, what's fascinating is when you look at the manuscripts of Mozart, and when you see the perfect handwriting, you don't see any corrections. It is just, it's in his mind, and he wrote it out.
And he could write anything. Concertos, sonatas, symphonies, operas. No other composer was able to create so fluently, so beautifully. Yet despite the richness of his talents, Mozart suffered years of poverty and illness. His career, hampered by court intrigue, was never really successful. He died penniless at the tender age of 36 and was buried in an unmarked grave. But his music lives on, radiant, luminous.
If there's any musician that you can talk about who has a God-given gift, it is Mozart. I mean, I'm not talking about talent. I'm talking about as though somebody just blessed him